Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. In a recent video I briefly mentioned that the oldest known culture to settle in Cusco, Peru was the little known Marcavalle culture, who lived within the boundaries of the future powerful Inca capital between 700 and 1500 BC, and maybe even before. Cusco in those days would have been a very different environment than what we know today. For example, the Great Inca Square in central Cusco, known as Huacaypata to the Inca, which was twice as big as today's Plaza de Armas in the same area, a place of important Inca ceremonies, was actually a swamp until sometime in the 1200s. It's only thanks to possibly Sinchi-Roca, the second Sapa Inca who died in 1260 AD, that the swamp was dried thanks to the canalisation of the rivers that bound the city. This was when the region was first built up, but it was during the reign of Pachacuti, the ninth ruler of the Inca, when the city of Cusco was really transformed and when we saw its true imperial power. The proto-Inca phase, or the formative years of what would one day be a vast and powerful empire, was known as the Killke, defined by a type of pottery that fades away from the archaeological record during imperial Inca times. During this time, the important patch of land between two rivers was transformed. We see the canalisation of the two main rivers, the controlled distribution of water and the drying of the swampland. This literally laid the foundations for Cusco, and allowed it to be turned into a city. The proto-Inca or Killke people, under the reign of the original Sapa Incas, was when the foundations were laid, when we see the first large masonry constructions, the first phase of megalithic walls, possibly even the first phase of the Coricancha, and the creation of Huacaypata Square. Before then, according to archaeological and climatological records, this land was only fit for small village communities. To learn more about the origins and development of the Cusco Valley, we do have a number of cores that were drilled into the now dried up Lake Marcacoca, situated next to Ollantaytambo, and these provide the best record of the paleoclimate, as well as historic evidence for human occupation in the Cusco region. The cores chart thousands of years of history. The first charcoal horizon, indicative of the first forest clearances in the Cusco Valley, date to 2200 BC, a practice that seems to have happened quite regularly to maintain soil fertility for agriculture. Pollen in the cores also shows that agriculture began at the same time. There was also a marked increase in pollen within the core samples around 1000 to 900 BC, the time we find the first human settlement archaeology in the Cusco Valley. Sediment analysis shows people were here from 2200 BC, but the first evidence of humans in the archaeological record are the people who experts call the Marcavalle Culture. These date back to between 700 and 1500 BC, maybe even earlier. So let's take a closer look. A few years ago, archaeologists digging in the southeast of Cusco, in the Huanchat region of the city, found a circular wall made of rough stone and clay, 7 meters in diameter, and interpreted as a dwelling place or ritual site. Another similar wall was also found, thought to belong to a lithic workshop or warehouse, and this showed signs of successive human occupation over several hundred years. A large number of ceramic fragments were found at both sites, some decorated with human faces and animals. There was also a selection of obsidian points, stone tools and also stone and bone beads. There were needles and spatulas that were made from animal bones, ceremonial figures, the remains of dogs and alpacas, as well as seeds and products like corn and beans. Parts of an alpaca were also found inside a circular well and were perhaps part of a sacrifice. There were 5 relatively recent excavation sites in the area, and the ruins of a building comprising chambers, stone walls, and the remains of an elevated platform were also found. In 2014, a Marcavalle burial site was also found in Cusco, complete with skeletal remains and artefacts. There were 5 individuals in 2 graves and 1 single. 3 were adults at the time of death, 1 was a child and the other an adolescent. The individuals date to around 1000 BC and are the oldest human remains ever found in Cusco. One of the bodies found was bent, and a stone structure had been constructed around it. Reports say that head modifications had been made to the body, and a perforated golden circular plate was also linked to the skull. This all means that when the Chavin and Paracas cultures were dominant in the Ancash and Ica regions respectively, the Marcavalle culture was flourishing in the wet and fertile lands of the Cusco Valley. These early formative years of Cusco saw the development of agricultural systems, and from the animal finds, it is thought they maintained herds of domesticated camelids. So, all the evidence suggests it was between 1500 and 700 BC when we see the first villages in the Cusco Valley. The Marcavalle site is one such village, and it was actually first identified in 1949 when the first ceramics were collected and documented. The first excavations actually took place in 1963 and 64. There was evidence of domesticated dogs and guinea pigs, as well as wild deer, pumas, rodents, birds and toads. Agricultural products like beans and maize were also found, and some were dated to 800 BC. Each village of this period was likely self-sufficient, each developing a speciality for trading purposes, and those that have studied this culture in detail believe there is evidence for trade with people in the region of Lake Titicaca. The Marcavalle site that defines the culture was just one village of many in the Cusco Valley, and this was how you could define civilization in this region before the arrival of the Wari. The number of villages grew and grew, agricultural practices increased, and archaeologists have identified more than 80 possible village sites from the so-called formative period. After this formative period, we have the Huacaypata period, the Kotokali period, the Wari period, and then the developmental years of the Inca state, which, as stated, was known as the Killke period, between 1000 and 1400 AD. So there is evidence of people in the Cusco Valley from 2200 BC, but the first real settled communities seems to be during the Marcavalle period, and this is where we should focus our attention. Where did these people come from and where did they go? How can we link the art and archaeology of this culture to others in ancient Peru? We have an example of head modifications and an associated golden circular disc. We have patterns, images and ornamentation on pottery that I'm sure I've seen in other cultures as well. Evidence suggests that Cusco civilization began with the Marcavalle culture, but it is very likely that these people originated elsewhere, ventured into the Cusco Valley and settled. Over the coming weeks, I'll be trying my best to trace these people the best I can to see if I can find out exactly where they came from. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.